The morning sun was bright and warm as it shone down on the big stone courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Colonel Marcus Whitfield stood tall in his perfect military uniform. He had been a soldier for 25 years. Everyone knew he was very strict about following rules. Today was important because the Queen was having a special dinner with leaders from other countries. The colonel looked at the royal guards standing in straight lines. These guards protect the Queen and her family, every day. They wear red uniforms and tall black hats. They must stand very still and look perfect at all times. But as Colonel Whitfield walked around checking each guard, he saw one young man who did not look right to him. The young guard's name was Private James Morrison. He was 22 years old and came from a city called Manchester. He had only finished his guard training a few weeks ago. The colonel thought the young man was not standing straight enough. This made him angry because royal guards must always look perfect. Colonel Whitfield walked over to the young guard. His heavy boots made loud sounds on the stone ground. All the other guards could hear him coming, but they could not move or look. They had to keep staring straight ahead no matter what happened. The colonel stopped right in front of Private Morrison. His face looked very serious and angry. He spoke in a loud, harsh voice that everyone could hear. "Private Morrison, you are not standing the right way. A royal guard must look perfect at all times. You are making all the other guards look bad." The young guard did not move or speak. He kept looking straight ahead like he was supposed to do. But Colonel Whitfield was not finished talking. He wanted to teach this young man a lesson that he would never forget. "I want you to give me a proper salute right now," the colonel ordered. "And it better be perfect or you will be in big trouble. Do you understand me, Private?" The other guards felt worried for their young friend, but they could not help him. They had to stay still and quiet. They knew that Colonel Whitfield could be very mean to soldiers who did not follow his orders exactly. Something strange happened then. Private Morrison slowly turned his head to look at Colonel Whitfield. This was not what guards usually do. They are supposed to look straight ahead at all times. But this young man looked right into the colonel's eyes. "Colonel Whitfield," the guard said in a calm voice, "before I follow your order, I think there is something you should know about respect and how to treat people." The colonel was shocked. No young soldier had ever spoken to him like this before. Usually when he gave an order, soldiers would obey right away without saying anything. But this guard was different. He spoke like he was not afraid at all. The other guards were surprised, too. They had never heard anyone talk back to Colonel Whitfield. They wondered what would happen next. Would the young guard get in terrible trouble? Would he lose his job as a royal guard? But there was something else strange happening. The young guard's voice sounded different now. It did not sound like the voice of a regular soldier from Manchester. It sounded more educated, like someone who went to expensive schools. The other guards began to feel that something very unusual was going on. Colonel Whitfield did not know the truth about Private Morrison. The young man was not really a regular guard at all. He was actually Prince William, who would one day become the King of England. The prince had been pretending to be a regular soldier for one whole week. Prince William had asked the army leaders to let him live like a regular guard. He wanted to see what life was really like for the people who protect his family every day. He ate the same food as the guards, he slept in the same rooms, he did all the same work. No one except a few top army leaders knew who he really was. The prince wanted to learn about the guards because someday he would be their king. He thought it was important to understand their lives and their problems. So he put on a regular uniform and pretended to be just another young soldier. During his week as a fake guard, Prince William saw many things. He saw how hard the guards worked. He saw how they helped each other. He also saw how some officers treated the guards badly. Some officers were mean and rude to the guards just because they had higher ranks. Now Colonel Whitfield was being mean to someone he thought was just a young guard, but he was actually being rude to the future King of England. The prince had seen enough bad behavior from officers like the colonel. As Colonel Whitfield stared at the young guard, his face began to change. Something about the guard's eyes and voice seemed familiar. Slowly, very slowly, the colonel began to realize who he was really talking to. His face turned white with fear and shock. Prince William could see that the colonel was starting to understand the truth. He continued to speak, but now his voice sounded more royal and important. I have spent this week watching how officers treat the guards who work under them. I have seen these men work very hard and show great loyalty. They deserve to be treated with respect." The other guards heard this and began to understand too. Their young friend was not really a guard at all. He was Prince William, their future king. They felt proud that he had chosen to spend time with them and learn about their lives. The colonel felt terrible. He had been rude and mean to the prince. He had shouted at the future king of England. He did not know what to say or do. His hands began to shake with worry. Prince William was not finished speaking. He had an important lesson to teach the colonel. "Real leadership is not about shouting at people or being mean to them," the prince said. "Good leaders treat all people with respect no matter what job they have. These guards work very hard to protect my family. They deserve to be treated well." The prince looked at each of the guards standing around them. Every person in uniform is important. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity. The best army units are strong because everyone respects each other, not because people are afraid. Colonel Whitfield listened to every word. He began to understand that he had been wrong about many things. He had thought that being strict and mean made him a good leader, but the prince was teaching him that real leadership comes from respect and kindness. Then something amazing happened. Prince William raised his hand and gave a perfect military salute. But he did not salute the colonel like the colonel had ordered. Instead, he turned to each of the royal guards and saluted them. "These men deserve to be honored," the prince said as he saluted each guard. "They show up every day to do a difficult job. They stand in the heat and cold. They protect people they have never met. They are true heroes." One by one, each royal guard returned the salute to their future king. It was a beautiful moment that none of them would ever forget. Even Colonel Whitfield raised his hand in a salute, finally understanding what real respect looked like. After that day, Colonel Whitfield became a completely different kind of leader. He stopped shouting at soldiers and started listening to them. He visited with the guards regularly to hear about their problems. He made new rules that treated everyone fairly and with respect. The story of Prince William's week as a guard became famous among soldiers. People told the story to show that good leaders care about all people, not just important people. The guards who were there that day always remembered the prince who chose to salute them instead of demanding their salutes. Years later, when Prince William became king, the guards knew they had a leader who truly understood their lives and respected their service. The lesson learned that sunny morning in the palace courtyard changed everyone who was there forever. Colonel Marcus Whitfield had been watching the guards for over an hour. He walked slowly between the long lines of red-uniformed men. Each guard stood perfectly still, like a statue. Their black hats sat straight on their heads. Their rifles were held in exactly the right position. Most of them looked perfect to the colonel's trained eyes. But Private James Morrison was different. The colonel could see small things that bothered him. The young man's left shoulder was slightly lower than his right. His chin was not lifted high enough. His eyes seemed to wander just a little bit instead of staring straight ahead. These tiny mistakes made the colonel very angry. The colonel had seen many young soldiers in his 25 years of service. He knew that some of them tried to be lazy when they thought no one was watching. He believed that being very strict was the only way to make good soldiers. He thought that if he was not hard on them, they would never learn to do their jobs properly. As he got closer to Private Morrison, the colonel's face became more serious. He could feel his anger growing inside him. This was the Queen's palace. Every guard here had to be absolutely perfect. There was no room for mistakes or sloppy behavior. The whole world was watching the royal guards. They represented England and the royal family. The colonel stopped walking about 10 feet away from Private Morrison. He stood there for a full minute, just staring at the young guard. He wanted to see if the guard would notice him and fix his posture. But Private Morrison continued to stand the same way. He did not seem to know that the colonel was watching him closely. Other guards in the formation could see what was happening. They felt nervous for their young friend. They all knew how strict Colonel Whitfield could be. They had heard stories about him from other soldiers. Some said he had made grown men cry with his harsh words. Others said he could end a soldier's career with one bad report. The guards wanted to help Private Morrison, but they could not move or speak. Royal Guard rules were very clear. When they were on duty, they had to stand still no matter what happened around them. They could not turn their heads or make any sounds. They had to act like they could not see or hear anything except their duty to protect the palace. But inside, the guards were worried. Private Morrison seemed like a good person. During his short time with them, he had been friendly and helpful. He shared his food with others. He helped clean the barracks without being asked. He listened when older guards gave him advice. Other guards did not want to see him get in trouble. Colonel Whitfield finally began walking toward Private Morrison. Each step was slow and deliberate. His heavy black boots made loud clicking sounds on the stone courtyard. The sound echoed off the tall palace walls. Even though the other guards could not look, they could hear the colonel getting closer and closer to their friend. The colonel's face was red with anger now. He had decided that this young guard needed to learn a lesson. In his mind, Private Morrison was showing disrespect to the Queen, to the army, and to him personally. The colonel believed that strict discipline was the only way to fix this problem. When he reached Private Morrison, the colonel stood directly in front of him. He was so close that the guard could probably feel his breath. The colonel's eyes stared hard into the young man's face. He was trying to make the guard feel scared and uncomfortable. "Private Morrison," the colonel said in a voice that was meant to frighten. "Look at me when I am speaking to you." Private Morrison slowly moved his eyes to look at the colonel. His face showed no fear or worry. This surprised the colonel because most young soldiers looked nervous when he spoke to them in his angry voice. But this guard seemed calm and unafraid. The colonel continued his attack. "Your posture is completely unacceptable. You are standing like a lazy civilian, not like a proud royal guard. Do you think this is some kind of game? Do you think protecting the Queen is a joke?" Private Morrison did not answer right away. He just looked steadily into the colonel's eyes. This made the colonel even more angry. He was used to soldiers apologizing quickly when he criticized them. He expected them to look down at the ground and promise to do better. But this young guard was different. "I am waiting for an answer, Private," the colonel said, his voice getting louder. "When a superior officer asks you a question, you respond immediately. That is basic military discipline that even a child should understand." The other guards felt their hearts beating faster. They had never heard the colonel so angry before. They wished they could help their friend, but they were trapped by their duty to remain still and silent. Some of them began to pray, quietly, in their minds that Private Morrison would apologize quickly and make the colonel's anger go away. But Private Morrison still did not speak. He continued to look directly at the colonel with calm, steady eyes. There was something in his expression that the colonel could not understand. It was not fear or defiance. It was something else entirely. The guard looked like he was thinking carefully about what to say next. The colonel decided to make his demands even stronger. "I want to see a perfect military salute from you right now, Private Morrison. And after that, I want you to explain why you think it is acceptable to show such poor discipline while wearing the uniform of Her Majesty's Royal Guard." The morning sun was getting higher in the sky. The stone courtyard was becoming warmer. Some of the other guards could feel sweat starting to form under their heavy uniforms and tall hats, but they could not move to wipe it away. They had to keep standing perfectly still while this confrontation continued in front of them. Private Morrison finally opened his mouth to speak. But instead of the quick apology that the colonel expected, the young guard said something that shocked everyone who could hear it. "Colonel Whitfield," he said in a voice that was surprisingly calm and controlled, "I think there are some things about respect and leadership that you need to understand before I follow your orders." The colonel's mouth fell open in amazement. No soldier had ever spoken to him like this before. Young privates were supposed to obey orders immediately without question or discussion. They were not supposed to give lessons to high-ranking officers. This was beyond anything the colonel had ever experienced in his long military career. The other guards could hardly believe what they were hearing. Private Morrison was either very brave or very foolish to speak to the colonel this way. They wondered what would happen next. Would the colonel have him arrested? Would he be kicked out of the Royal Guard forever? Or was there something more to this situation that none of them understood? The silence in the courtyard was so complete that everyone could hear the distant sounds of London traffic beyond the palace walls. Colonel Whitfield stared at Private Morrison with his mouth still open in shock. In all his years as an officer, no young soldier had ever dared to speak to him the way this guard just had. The colonel's face was turning from red to purple with rage. His hands were shaking slightly as he tried to control his anger. He had expected a quick salute and maybe a stammered apology. Instead, this young private was telling him that he needed to learn about respect and leadership. It was unthinkable. It went against everything the colonel believed about military order and discipline. "What did you just say to me?" the colonel asked in a low, dangerous voice. "Did you just refuse to follow a direct order? Did you just tell a superior officer that he needs to learn something from you?" Private Morrison stood very still, but his eyes never left the colonel's face. There was something strange about the way he looked. Most young soldiers would be trembling with fear by now. Their voices would be shaking when they spoke, but this guard seemed completely calm, as if he was not afraid of the colonel at all. "I did not refuse your order, sir," Private Morrison said carefully. "I simply said there are things you should understand first. Sometimes it is important to know the whole situation before making demands." The other guards in the formation were amazed by what they were hearing. They had all been through basic training together. They had learned that when an officer gives an order, you follow it immediately without question. You never argue or ask for explanations. You certainly never tell the officer that they need to understand something first. But there was something about Private Morrison's voice that seemed different now. When he first joined their unit a few weeks ago, he had sounded like most of them, like a regular young man from an ordinary English town. Now his words sounded more educated, more refined. It was as if he had been hiding his real way of speaking, until this moment. Some of the older guards began to feel that something unusual was happening. They had been in the Royal Guard for many years. They had seen all kinds of situations and met many different types of people. But this felt different from anything they had experienced before. Colonel Whitfield took a step closer to Private Morrison. He was so angry that small drops of spit flew from his mouth when he spoke. "You listen to me very carefully, Private. I do not need to understand anything from you. You are a nobody. You are just a young soldier who barely finished training. I am a colonel with 25 years of experience. When I give you an order, you follow it. That is how the army works." Private Morrison listened to the colonel's angry words without changing his expression. When the colonel finished speaking, the young guard nodded slightly as if he was thinking about what had been said. Then he spoke again in that same calm, educated voice. "You are right that you have many years of experience, Colonel, but having experience does not always mean having wisdom. Sometimes the most important lessons come from understanding the people you lead, not just ordering them around." The colonel could not believe what he was hearing. This was beyond insubordination. This was a young private giving him a lecture about leadership. It was impossible. It was insane. He began to wonder if the guard had some kind of mental problem that made him act this way. But as the colonel looked more closely at Private Morrison's face, he began to notice things that he had not seen before. The young man's skin was very smooth and clean, like someone who had never done hard physical work. His hands, which held his rifle, were soft-looking, not rough and calloused like most soldiers' hands. His hair was cut in a perfect military style, but it looked like it had been done by an expensive barber, not by the cheap barbers that most soldiers used. There were other small details too. The guard's uniform fit him perfectly, as if it had been specially made for him. Most soldiers had to wear uniforms that were close to their size but not perfect. Private Morrison's boots were polished to a brilliant shine that took hours of work to achieve. His equipment was all in perfect condition, much better than what most new soldiers had. The colonel began to feel confused. These little details did not make sense for a regular soldier from Manchester. They suggested someone with money and education, someone from a much higher social class than most people who joined the army as enlisted men. "Who are you, really?" the colonel asked suddenly. The question surprised even him. He had not planned to ask it. But something about this whole situation felt wrong to him now. Private Morrison smiled slightly for the first time during their conversation. It was not a nervous smile or a mocking smile. It was the kind of smile that someone gives when they know a secret that others do not know. "I am exactly who my name tag says I am," the guard replied. "Private James Morrison, service number 245567889, assigned to Her Majesty's Royal Guard. But you are asking the right question, Colonel. Sometimes things are not exactly what they appear to be." The other guards were listening to every word, even though they had to keep looking straight ahead. They were starting to understand that their friend Private Morrison was not a regular soldier like them, but they could not figure out who he really was or why he was pretending to be one of them. Some of them remembered small things from the past week that now seemed important. Private Morrison always seemed to know a lot about palace procedures that new guards usually had to learn slowly. He never seemed tired after long hours of standing guard, as if he was used to formal ceremonies. He spoke differently when he thought no one was listening, using words that most soldiers did not know. One guard named Thomas remembered that Private Morrison had once mentioned details about the royal family's daily schedule that regular guards were not supposed to know. At the time, Thomas had thought his friend had just heard gossip from other guards. Now he wondered if there was another explanation. Another guard named David recalled that Private Morrison never seemed worried about making mistakes during their training. Most new guards were nervous about learning all the rules and procedures. But Morrison had acted as if he already knew everything, like someone who had been around the palace his whole life. Colonel Whitfield was becoming more confused and frustrated by the minute. Nothing about this situation made sense to him. He was used to being in control of every conversation with soldiers under his command, but this young guard was somehow managing to turn everything around and make the colonel feel like he was the one being examined. "I do not care about riddles and mysterious answers," the colonel said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I gave you a direct order to salute, and I expect you to follow that order right now. Whatever game you think you are playing, it ends here." Private Morrison looked at the colonel for a long moment before responding. When he spoke again, his voice had changed even more. Now he sounded not just educated, but actually aristocratic, like someone from the very highest levels of British society. "Colonel Whitfield," he said, "I will give you the salute you have requested. But first, I want you to think carefully about why you are demanding it. Is it because you truly deserve respect? Or is it because you enjoy having power over people who cannot fight back?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The colonel felt as if the ground beneath his feet was shifting. Nothing was going the way it was supposed to go. This conversation was completely outside his experience and understanding, and somewhere, in the back of his mind, a terrible thought was beginning to form. A thought so shocking that he tried to push it away. But it kept coming back, stronger each time. What if this young guard was not who he appeared to be? What if the colonel had just made the biggest mistake of his entire career? 3 days earlier, in a private meeting room deep inside Buckingham Palace, Prince William had sat across from General Sir Peter Harrison, the highest-ranking military officer in the Royal Guard. The general was one of only 5 people in the entire world who knew about the prince's unusual plan. "Your Royal Highness," the general had said with concern in his voice, "are you absolutely certain about this? Living as a common soldier for a week is not something that any member of the royal family has ever done before. There could be risks that we have not thought about." Prince William had leaned forward in his chair, his eyes bright with determination. "General, how can I lead these men someday if I do not understand their lives? How can I make decisions about their welfare if I have never experienced what they go through every day? I need to know what it really means to be a royal guard." The general had tried one more time to change the prince's mind. "Sir, we could arrange for you to visit with the guards in your official capacity. You could speak with them, observe their training, review their living conditions. There are safer ways to learn about their experiences." But Prince William had shaken his head firmly. "No, General. When people know who I am, they act differently. They tell me what they think I want to hear, not the truth. Guards would never complain about poor treatment or bad conditions to the future king, but they might talk honestly to someone they think is just another soldier like them. So the plan had been carefully arranged. Prince William would spend exactly 1 week living as Private James Morrison, a new royal guard from Manchester. Only General Harrison and 4 other top officers knew the truth. Everyone else, from the drill sergeants to the cooks to the other guards, believed that Private Morrison was exactly what he appeared to be. The prince had prepared carefully for his week as a common soldier. He had studied the background story that intelligence officers created for him. He had practiced speaking with a Manchester accent. He had even spent hours making his hands look rough and getting his body in the same physical condition as a young man who had grown up doing manual labor. For 6 days, the plan had worked perfectly. Prince William had eaten the same simple food as the other guards. He had slept in the same crowded barracks. He had stood guard for long hours in the cold and heat. He had cleaned bathrooms and polished boots and followed orders from sergeants, who had no idea they were commanding a member of the royal family. During those 6 days, Prince William had learned many things that shocked him. He discovered that some officers treated the guards very badly, shouting at them and punishing them for tiny mistakes. He saw that the guards worked much harder than most people realized, often going without breaks or proper meals. He learned that many guards worried about their families back home because their military pay was quite low. The prince also saw the incredible dedication and loyalty of the royal guards. Despite the hardships and poor treatment from some officers, the guards never complained about their duty to protect the royal family. They took pride in their service. They looked out for each other like brothers. They would have gladly died to keep the royal family safe. Most importantly, Prince William saw how good leadership could inspire people, while bad leadership could crush their spirits. Some officers earned respect by treating their soldiers fairly and caring about their well-being. But others, like Colonel Whitfield, used fear and intimidation to control the men under their command. The prince had watched Colonel Whitfield several times during the week. He had seen the colonel make grown men feel ashamed for small mistakes. He had heard him speak to experienced soldiers as if they were stupid children. The colonel seemed to believe that being harsh and critical was the same thing as being a strong leader. Now, as Prince William stood in the palace courtyard facing Colonel Whitfield's anger, he realized that this was the perfect moment to teach an important lesson about real leadership. The colonel was about to get the shock of his life. Back in the present moment, Colonel Whitfield was staring at Private Morrison with growing confusion and fear. Something about the young guard's eyes seemed familiar, but he could not figure out what it was. There was a quality of confidence and authority in those eyes that did not belong in the face of a common soldier. "Private Morrison," the colonel said slowly, "remove your hat." This was an unusual request. Royal guards almost never removed their tall black hats while on duty. But something was driving the colonel to get a better look at this mysterious young man who was acting so strangely. Private Morrison reached up and carefully lifted the heavy hat from his head. As he did, his hair came into full view under the bright morning sun. It was light brown hair, perfectly styled, exactly the same color and cut that everyone in England had seen in thousands of newspaper photos and television broadcasts. The colonel's face went completely white. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. He felt like he might faint or be sick to his stomach. Standing before him, wearing the uniform of a common royal guard, was Prince William Arthur Philip Louis Windsor, second in line to the throne of England, future Duke of Cambridge, and someday, King of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth nations. The other guards could not see Private Morrison's face without his hat, but they could see Colonel Whitfield's reaction. The colonel looked like a man who had just seen a ghost or received the most terrible news of his life. Some of the guards began to suspect that their friend Private Morrison was much more important than any of them had realized. Prince William spoke again, and now his voice carried the full authority of his royal position. "Colonel Whitfield, for the past week I have been living among these guards as one of them. I have seen how they work, how they live, and how they are treated by their officers. I have learned things that disturb me greatly." The colonel tried to speak, but only managed to make a small croaking sound. His throat felt completely dry. His mind was racing with the horrible realization of what he had done. He had yelled at the prince. He had insulted him. He had demanded that the future King of England salute him like a common soldier. "Your Royal Highness," the colonel finally whispered, so quietly that only Prince William could hear him. "I had no idea. Please, forgive me, I am so very sorry." But Prince William was not finished. He had not gone through a week of hardship just to accept a quick apology. He had something much more important to accomplish. "Colonel," the prince said in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard, "your apology is not what matters here. What matters is that you have shown me exactly the kind of leadership that I will not tolerate in the Royal Guard. You have demonstrated that you believe leadership means making people afraid of you rather than inspiring them to serve with pride." The colonel felt tears starting to form in his eyes. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. He had humiliated himself in front of the future king and dozens of guards who would never forget this moment. But Prince William was not trying to destroy the colonel. He was trying to teach him something that would make him a better leader and a better man. The real lesson was just beginning. The morning breeze had stopped blowing completely. The courtyard felt frozen in time as Colonel Whitfield struggled to understand the full meaning of what was happening to him. His mind kept jumping between disbelief and terror. Part of him hoped this was all a nightmare that he would wake up from soon. But the prince's steady gaze and calm voice made it impossible to deny the reality of the situation. Prince William could see the panic in the colonel's eyes, but he did not feel sorry. For him, during his week as Private Morrison, the prince had watched Colonel Whitfield make other soldiers feel this same kind of fear and humiliation. The difference was that those soldiers had done nothing wrong. They were just trying to do their jobs and serve their country with honor. "Colonel," Prince William said, "I want you to think about how you feel right now. Your heart is beating fast. Your hands are shaking. You feel scared and confused and ashamed. This is exactly how you make young soldiers feel every day when you yell at them for tiny mistakes." The colonel nodded weakly. He could barely breathe properly. Every part of his body felt weak and unsteady. He had never experienced such complete shock and fear in his entire life. The thought that he had been treating other people this way without understanding how horrible it felt made him sick to his stomach. Around them, the other royal guards were beginning to piece together what was happening. They could not see Private Morrison's face clearly, but they could hear everything that was being said. Slowly, the incredible truth was becoming clear to them. Their friend and fellow guard was actually Prince William, the man they had sworn to protect with their lives. Guard Thomas Wilson, who had shared meals with Private Morrison all week, felt his knees go weak with shock. He remembered complaining to Morrison about the bad food in the mess hall and the uncomfortable beds in the barracks. He had even made jokes about the royal family, not knowing that one of them was sitting right next to him listening to every word. Guard David Clark, who slept in the bunk next to Morrison, suddenly remembered all the times the young man had asked questions about what it was really like to be a royal guard. At the time, David had thought Morrison was just curious because he was new. Now he realized that the prince had been trying to understand the real experiences of the people who protected his family. Guard Michael Brown, one of the older and more experienced men, felt a mixture of amazement and pride. He had spent several evenings teaching Morrison about palace procedures and guard traditions. He had shared stories about his 10 years of service and the challenges that guards faced. Now he understood that he had been giving those lessons to the future King of England. All of the guards felt the same emotions rushing through them. They were shocked that they had been living and working alongside Prince William without knowing it. They were proud that the prince had cared enough about them to experience their lives firsthand. And they were grateful that someone in the royal family finally understood what their service really involved, but they were also worried about Colonel Whitfield. They had all experienced his harsh treatment at one time or another. They knew he could be mean and unfair to soldiers who could not defend themselves. Now he had been caught treating the prince the same way. They wondered what would happen to him. Prince William looked around at all the guards in the formation. Even though they could not turn their heads to look at him, he could sense their attention and their emotions. These men had accepted him as one of their own for an entire week. They had shared their food with him, helped him learn his duties, and treated him with the friendship and loyalty that made the Royal Guard special. "Gentlemen," the prince said, speaking to all the guards now instead of just the colonel, "you do not need to continue standing at attention. This is no longer a formal ceremony. Please look at me and hear what I have to say." The guards were confused. They had been trained never to break formation without a direct order from their commanding officer. But Prince William was giving them permission to move, and he outranked everyone in the courtyard, including Colonel Whitfield. One by one, the guards turned their heads to look at the man they had known as Private Morrison. When they saw his face clearly for the first time without the shadow of his hat, there was no doubt left. It was definitely Prince William, the same face they had seen in newspapers and on television their entire lives. Some of the guards smiled with amazement. Others looked worried about getting in trouble for not recognizing him earlier. A few seemed overwhelmed by the strange situation and did not know how to react at all. Prince William smiled back at them warmly. "You have nothing to worry about," he told them. "You treated me exactly as you should have treated me, as a fellow soldier and a friend. You showed me kindness and respect because that is who you are as people, not because you knew my title or position." Guard Wilson found his voice and spoke up nervously. "Your Royal Highness, we had no idea. If we had known, we would have—" "You would have what?" Prince William interrupted gently. "Would you have been kinder to me? Would you have shared your food more freely? Would you have been more helpful when I was learning my duties?" "I do not think so. You treated me perfectly because you are good men who care about each other." The guards felt a warm feeling of pride at the prince's words. During their week with Morrison, they had simply acted naturally, the way they always acted with new members of their unit. They had not been trying to impress anyone or gain favor with important people. They had just been themselves. Colonel Whitfield listened to this exchange with growing understanding of how badly he had misjudged the situation. While he had been focused on finding fault and showing his authority, the regular guards had been demonstrating true leadership through their kindness and cooperation. They had made the prince feel welcome and valued without knowing who he was. Prince William turned his attention back to the colonel. "Do you see the difference, Colonel? These men earned respect by giving respect. They showed leadership by helping someone they thought needed their help. They built loyalty by being loyal themselves. That is what real military leadership looks like." The colonel nodded, though he still felt too shocked to speak properly. Everything the prince was saying made perfect sense, but it went against everything the colonel had believed about leadership for his entire career. He had always thought that officers had to be tough and demanding to earn respect from their soldiers. "I have been wrong about many things, Your Royal Highness," the colonel finally managed to say. "I see that now. But I do not know how to change. I have been leading this way for so many years that I do not know any other way to do it." Prince William's expression softened slightly. This was the response he had been hoping for. The colonel was not making excuses or trying to defend his behavior. He was admitting his mistakes and asking for help to do better. That showed the kind of character that could be improved with the right guidance. "Colonel," the prince said, "the fact that you can admit you were wrong is the first step toward becoming the leader these men deserve. But understanding your mistakes is not enough. You must also be willing to work very hard to change your habits and learn new ways of treating people." The colonel straightened up slightly, feeling a small spark of hope. Maybe his career was not completely over. Maybe he could find a way to make up for his mistakes and become worthy of the prince's trust. "I am willing to do whatever it takes, Your Royal Highness," he said with more strength in his voice. "Please tell me how I can learn to be better." Prince William studied Colonel Whitfield's face carefully. He could see that the colonel's request for help was genuine. The shock and fear in the man's eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a real desire to understand and improve. This was exactly what the prince had hoped would happen. "Colonel," Prince William began, "the most important thing you must understand is that every person wearing this uniform is a human being with feelings, hopes, and dignity. They are not just tools for you to use or objects for you to order around. They are men who have chosen to risk their lives to serve something greater than themselves." The prince gestured toward the guards who were still listening intently to every word. "Look at these men, Colonel. Really look at them. Each one has a family back home who worries about him. Each one has dreams for his future. Each one has fears and doubts and struggles, just like you do. When you yell at them or treat them badly, you are hurting real people, not just breaking military discipline. Colonel Whitfield looked around at the guards with new eyes. For the first time in years, he tried to see them as individuals instead of just soldiers under his command. Guard Wilson looked very young, probably not much older than the colonel's own son. Guard Clark had kind eyes that reminded the colonel of his brother. Guard Brown had gray hair at his temples and lines on his face that showed years of hard work and dedication. The colonel realized that he had never really thought about these men as people before. He had only seen them as parts of a military machine that he was supposed to keep running smoothly. He had focused so much on maintaining discipline and following rules that he had forgotten about the human cost of his harsh methods. Prince William continued his lesson. I spent this week eating the same food as these guards. It is not very good food, Colonel. It is often cold or overcooked. Sometimes there is not enough of it. But I never heard any of these men complain, even when they were hungry. Do you know why? The colonel shook his head, genuinely curious about the answer. Because they believe in their mission, the prince explained. They know that protecting the royal family and serving their country is more important than having comfortable meals or easy working conditions. That kind of dedication and sacrifice deserves to be honored, not punished with harsh words and unfair treatment. Guard Wilson felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened to the prince speak about the guard's dedication. He had joined the Royal Guard because he wanted to serve his country, but there had been many times when Colonel Whitfield's harsh treatment made him consider quitting. Hearing the future king acknowledge their sacrifices made all the difficult moments seem worthwhile. Prince William walked closer to Colonel Whitfield. I also spent this week sleeping in the barracks with these men. The beds are narrow and uncomfortable. The rooms are crowded and noisy. But every night these guards went to sleep knowing they would have to wake up early and work hard the next day, and they did it gladly. They never asked for special treatment or easier duties. The colonel was beginning to understand how much he had underestimated the character and commitment of the men under his command. He had always assumed that soldiers needed to be pushed and threatened to do their jobs properly. But the prince was showing him that these particular soldiers were motivated by something much more powerful than fear. Colonel, Prince William said, I want you to think about your own reasons for joining the military. What made you want to become a soldier 25 years ago? The colonel thought back to his youth. He remembered being a young man full of idealism and patriotism. He had wanted to serve his country and make a difference in the world. He had dreamed of being part of something important and meaningful. Those feelings seemed very far away now, buried under years of bureaucracy and routine. I wanted to serve something greater than myself, the colonel said quietly. I wanted to be part of protecting freedom and democracy. I wanted to make my family proud and contribute to something that mattered. Exactly, Prince William said, with approval. And that is exactly why these men joined the Royal Guard. They have the same noble motivations that you once had. But somewhere along the way you forgot that truth. You began to see them as problems to solve instead of heroes to support. The prince paused to let this sink in, then continued. Real leadership is not about making people afraid of you, Colonel. Fear might make people obey your orders, but it will never make them give their best effort or feel proud of their service. Fear creates soldiers who do the minimum required, and nothing more. Colonel Whitfield nodded slowly. He was beginning to see the flaws in his approach to leadership. Many times over the years, he had been frustrated when soldiers seemed unmotivated or did poor work. He had responded by being even more strict and demanding. But now he wondered if his harsh treatment had actually caused the problems he was trying to fix. So how should I lead them, Your Royal Highness? The colonel asked. If not through discipline and strict rules, then how do I ensure they do their jobs properly? Prince William smiled. This was the most important part of the lesson. You lead them by inspiring them, Colonel. You show them that you care about their well-being and their success. You treat them with the same respect you would want if you were in their position. You recognize their good work and help them improve when they make mistakes instead of just punishing them. The prince looked around at the guards again. During my week here, I watched how these men interact with each other. When someone makes a mistake, the others help him learn how to do better. When someone is struggling with a personal problem, his fellow guards offer support and encouragement. They have created a brotherhood based on mutual respect and care for each other. Guard Clark remembered several instances when he had made mistakes during the week, and how the other guards had quietly helped him without making him feel ashamed. It was true that the guards looked out for each other in ways that their officers rarely did. "That is the kind of leadership you should provide, Colonel," Prince William said. "Instead of being the person they fear, you should be the person they can count on for support and guidance. Instead of looking for their failures, you should be celebrating their successes and helping them reach their potential." The colonel felt a strange mixture of emotions. Part of him felt ashamed for all the years he had been leading poorly. But part of him also felt excited about the possibility of doing better. He had never thought about leadership the way the prince was describing it, but it sounded much more fulfilling than his current approach. "Your Royal Highness," the colonel said, "I can see the wisdom in what you are saying, but I am concerned about maintaining discipline and standards. If I am not strict with the guards, how will I ensure they follow orders and maintain the high level of performance required for palace security?" Prince William had expected this question. It was the same concern that many officers had when they first learned about respectful leadership methods. "Colonel, there is a big difference between maintaining high standards and being cruel to people. You can demand excellence from these guards while still treating them with dignity and respect. In fact, people usually perform much better when they feel valued and supported than when they feel afraid and criticized." The morning sun was now high overhead, casting shorter shadows across the palace courtyard. Prince William looked at each of the royal guards who had been his companions for the past week. These men had shared their meals with him, helped him learn his duties, and treated him with genuine friendship. They had no idea that their kindness had been given to the future King of England. "Gentlemen," Prince William said, addressing all the guards in formation, "you have taught me more in 1 week than I learned in years of formal education about leadership and service. You showed me what it truly means to be dedicated to duty while still caring for your fellow soldiers." Guard Wilson felt his heart swelling with pride. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined that his simple acts of friendship would be noticed by someone so important. He remembered sharing his extra food with Morrison when the young guard had been too tired to eat after a long day of training. Now he realized he had been feeding the Prince of Wales. Prince William continued speaking to the guards. "Each of you welcomed me into your brotherhood without knowing anything about my background or my family. You judged me only by my character and my willingness to work hard alongside you. That is the kind of fairness and decency that makes the Royal Guard special." The prince then turned back to Colonel Whitfield, who was still standing at attention with his face pale with shock and embarrassment. The colonel's whole world had been turned upside down in the space of a few minutes. Everything he thought he knew about leadership and military service was being challenged by this unexpected encounter. "Colonel," Prince William said, "you asked me to give you a salute. You demanded it as a sign of respect for your rank and authority. But I think it is time for you to understand what respect really means and how it should be earned." The colonel nodded weakly. He was afraid of what the prince might say next, but he knew he deserved whatever criticism was coming. His behavior had been inexcusable, and there was no way to take back the harsh words he had spoken to the future king. Prince William straightened to his full height. In that moment, he looked every inch the royal prince he was born to be. His bearing was perfect. His expression was dignified, and his voice carried the authority of centuries of royal tradition. But there was also something else in his manner, a warmth and humanity that came from his week of living as a common soldier. "I will indeed give you a salute, Colonel," the prince said, "but not the kind you demanded, and not for the reasons you expected." Prince William turned away from the colonel and faced Guard Wilson, the young man who had been so kind and helpful during the week. Slowly and with great ceremony, the prince raised his right hand in a perfect military salute. "Private Wilson," the prince said in a clear voice that everyone could hear, "I salute you for your dedication, your kindness, and your service to the crown." Guard Wilson's eyes filled with tears as he returned the salute. Never in his life had he imagined receiving such an honor. His hands were shaking as he held his salute, overwhelmed by the incredible moment he was experiencing. Prince William then turned to Guard Clark and repeated the same ceremonial salute. "Private Clark, I salute you for your professionalism, your loyalty, and your willingness to help a fellow soldier learn his duties." One by one, Prince William moved through the formation of guards, giving each man a formal salute and acknowledging his individual contributions to the Royal Guard. He mentioned specific acts of kindness and professionalism that he had witnessed during his week among them. Each guard stood a little straighter as he received recognition from the future king. When he reached Guard Brown, the oldest and most experienced member of the unit, Prince William paused for a longer moment. "Sergeant Brown," he said, using the man's correct rank, "I salute you not only for your years of faithful service, but for the wisdom and leadership you show to younger guards every day. You are the kind of leader that others naturally want to follow." Guard Brown had served in the Royal Guard for 12 years, but this was the most meaningful moment of his entire career. He felt proud not just of the recognition he was receiving, but of the fact that the prince had noticed and appreciated the way the guards took care of each other. As Prince William finished saluting each guard, he returned to the center of the formation where Colonel Whitfield was still standing in shocked silence. The colonel had watched the entire ceremony with growing understanding of what real leadership looked like. "Do you see what just happened, Colonel?" Prince William asked. "I did not salute these men because they were forced to salute me first. I did not demand their respect and then grudgingly give them a small amount in return. I gave them my respect freely because they earned it through their actions and their character." The colonel nodded, finally beginning to understand the lesson the prince was teaching him. All his life he had believed that respect flowed upward in the military, that soldiers should respect their officers, but officers did not need to show the same respect to soldiers. The prince was showing him that real respect flows in both directions. "Your Royal Highness," the colonel said, his voice much quieter and more humble than before, "I can see now that I have been wrong about many things. These men do deserve respect and recognition. They deserve to be treated as the professionals and patriots they are." Prince William studied the colonel's face carefully. The change in the man's attitude seemed genuine. The shock of the morning's events had broken through years of rigid thinking and opened the colonel's mind to new ideas about leadership. "Colonel," the prince said, "I believe you are sincere in wanting to change. But understanding the need to change is only the first step. The real challenge will be changing your habits and your daily behavior toward the men under your command." The colonel took a deep breath. "I understand, Your Royal Highness. It will not be easy to undo 25 years of poor leadership habits, but I want to try. These men deserve better from me." Prince William finally turned to face Colonel Whitfield directly. Very slowly, he raised his hand in a salute. But this salute was different from the ones he had given to the guards. This salute was conditional, a challenge rather than a recognition. "Colonel Whitfield," the prince said, "I salute the leader you have the potential to become, not the leader you have been. This salute is my promise to give you a chance to prove that you can change, but it is also my expectation that you will earn it through your future actions." Colonel Whitfield returned the salute with trembling hands. He understood that he was being given an incredible gift, a second chance to redeem himself and become the kind of officer these guards deserved. He also understood that this chance came with great responsibility and high expectations. The ceremony was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Prince William had used his week as a common soldier to teach a lesson about respect, leadership, and human dignity. Now it remained to be seen whether that lesson would create lasting change in the way the Royal Guard was led and managed. As the morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A moment when true leadership had triumphed over mere authority, and when respect had been earned rather than demanded. 2 weeks had passed since the extraordinary morning in the palace courtyard, and Colonel Marcus Whitfield was sitting alone in his office late in the evening. On his desk were dozens of reports and paperwork that needed his attention, but his mind kept wandering back to that life-changing encounter with Prince William. The memory of his shock and embarrassment was still fresh and painful, but something else had grown from that experience. a genuine desire to become the leader his soldiers deserved. The colonel had not wasted any time in beginning his transformation. The very next day after the incident, he had called a meeting with all the senior sergeants in the Royal Guard. Instead of giving orders and making demands as he had always done before, he had asked them a simple question. What can I do to better support you and the men under your command? The sergeants had been suspicious at first. They were used to the colonel's harsh and demanding style. They expected this sudden interest in their opinions to be some kind of trap or test. But as the meeting continued and the colonel listened carefully to their concerns, they began to realize that his change of attitude was genuine. Sergeant Brown, the experienced guard who had helped Prince William during his undercover week, had been the first to speak up. Sir, the men work very hard, but they never hear when they do well. They only hear from officers when something goes wrong. It would help morale if we could find ways to recognize good performance. Colonel Whitfield had written down every suggestion the sergeants made. He asked follow-up questions and took notes like a student learning from teachers. This was completely different from his usual behavior of talking most of the time, while expecting others to simply listen and agree. By the end of that first meeting, the colonel had a list of 23 specific changes he could make to improve conditions for the guards and show them more respect. Some of the changes were small, like making sure the mess hall had better food and that uniforms were properly fitted for each guard. Others were bigger, like creating a system to publicly recognize guards who showed exceptional dedication or helped their fellow soldiers. The colonel had started implementing these changes immediately. He began walking through the barracks and common areas regularly, not to find fault and give punishment, but to check on the welfare of his men and see if they needed anything to help them do their jobs better. The guards had been amazed by this change in their commanding officer's behavior. At first, many of them were nervous when they saw the colonel approaching. They had learned to expect criticism and harsh words from him. But instead of anger and demands, he brought genuine interest in their well-being and appreciation for their service. Guard Wilson, who had been one of Prince William's closest companions during the undercover week, was working at his post one afternoon when Colonel Whitfield approached him. Wilson prepared himself for the usual harsh critique of his performance or appearance. Private Wilson, the colonel said, I wanted to thank you for the excellent job you did during the state dinner last week. I observed your professionalism and attention to detail, and it was exactly the standard we expect from the Royal Guard. Wilson could hardly believe what he was hearing. In his 3 years of service, no officer had ever thanked him for doing his job well. The colonel's words made him feel proud and valued in a way he had never experienced before. Similar scenes were happening throughout the Royal Guard as Colonel Whitfield made an effort to recognize good work and treat his soldiers as valuable human beings rather than just tools to be used. The change in morale was dramatic and immediate, but the real test of the colonel's transformation came 3 weeks after the incident with Prince William. A young recruit named Private Anderson made a serious mistake during a ceremonial drill. He lost his concentration and broke formation at exactly the wrong moment, disrupting the entire ceremony in front of hundreds of tourists and dignitaries. In the past, Colonel Whitfield would have screamed at Private Anderson in front of everyone, humiliated him with harsh criticism, and probably assigned him to weeks of punishment duty. The old colonel would have seen this as an opportunity to show his authority and make an example that would keep other guards from making similar mistakes. But the new colonel handled the situation completely differently. He quietly pulled Private Anderson aside after the ceremony was over and spoke to him privately. Instead of anger and punishment, the colonel showed concern and offered help. Private Anderson, he said, I can see that you are upset about what happened during the drill. These kinds of mistakes happen to everyone when they are learning complex procedures. The important thing now is to understand what went wrong and how we can prevent it from happening again. Private Anderson had been expecting to be yelled at and possibly kicked out of the Royal Guard. The colonel's kind and understanding response made him feel grateful rather than resentful. He was eager to learn from his mistake and prove that he deserved to wear the uniform. The colonel spent 20 minutes working with Private Anderson to identify what had caused the mistake and develop strategies to help him maintain concentration during future ceremonies. He also arranged for Sergeant Brown to provide additional training and support for the young recruit. Word of this incident spread quickly through the Royal Guard. The soldiers were amazed at how differently their commanding officer was treating them. Instead of fear and anxiety, they began to feel supported and valued. The result was that they worked even harder and took even more pride in their service. 6 months after Prince William's undercover week, the transformation in the Royal Guard was obvious to everyone. Morale was higher than it had been in years. The guards looked sharper, performed better, and showed genuine enthusiasm for their duties. Several guards who had been considering leaving the service decided to stay because they now felt respected and appreciated. Colonel Whitfield had also changed personally. He looked younger and more energetic than he had in years. The stress and anger that had marked his face for so long had been replaced by a calm confidence and genuine warmth. He enjoyed his work again for the first time in decades because he was building people up instead of tearing them down. The story of Prince William's week as a common soldier and the lesson he taught Colonel Whitfield became legendary throughout the British military. Officers at all levels heard the story and began to examine their own leadership styles. Many of them realized that they had been making the same mistakes as the colonel, treating their soldiers as objects rather than as human beings deserving of respect. Prince William himself was deeply satisfied with the results of his unusual experiment. He had gained invaluable insight into the daily lives of the people who protected his family, and he had helped transform a poor leader into a good one. Most importantly, he had improved the lives of dozens of dedicated soldiers who deserved better treatment than they had been receiving. On quiet evenings, Colonel Whitfield often thought about the morning that had changed his life. He felt grateful to Prince William for teaching him such an important lesson, even though the method had been shocking and embarrassing at the time. He realized that the prince could have simply had him transferred or dismissed from his position. Instead, the prince had chosen to help him become a better leader and a better man. The colonel had framed the list of suggestions from his sergeants and hung it on the wall of his office. Every day when he came to work, he looked at that list to remind himself of his commitment to serve the people under his command, rather than simply commanding them. Years later, when Colonel Whitfield finally retired from military service, hundreds of former guards attended his farewell ceremony. Many of them spoke about how his leadership had influenced their lives and careers. They praised him as an officer who had genuinely cared about their welfare and had helped them become the best soldiers they could be. In his retirement speech, Colonel Whitfield told the story of his encounter with Prince William and the lesson that had transformed his approach to leadership. He urged the younger officers present to remember that their most important duty was not to enforce rules or maintain discipline, but to serve and support the brave men and women who had volunteered to serve their country. The lesson that Prince William taught that morning in the palace courtyard continued to influence military leadership throughout the British Armed Forces for many years to come. It became a reminder that true leadership is based on respect, care, and service to others, not on fear, intimidation, and the abuse of authority. And whenever new guards joined the Royal Guard, they heard the story of the prince who chose to salute his soldiers rather than demand their salutes, and the colonel who learned that the greatest leaders are those who lift others up rather than tear them down.